Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Tech Tactics Live, episode 37. We are here in PCA's garage in Columbia, Maryland. It's glad to have you with us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about 2021 Porsche values, what's hot, what's not. It's been about exactly 1 year since we did the 2020 version of this show, and we're going to kind of revisit what we talked about there. But before we start, I want to make sure we thank Pirelli, our sponsor, thank our local PCA member, Harley, for this beautiful Mexico Blue 991 Speedster. And I want to remind you to do us a favor and click that like button. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't, because we have lots of great videos that we can make sure we remind you, and future Tech Tactics Live, and also comment. And especially if you're watching tonight, be sure to comment in the live chat area, because when you do, what we'll do is we'll enter you into a raffle for two great prizes. We have two prizes here. We have the 911 and 912 Porsche, a restorer's guide to authenticity. We have a book there. And then we have this awesome folding utility pad for when you're going to do an inspection on a car that you might want to consider into the future. So back we have today, and I was actually with him just this past weekend, my brother from another mother, Nathan Merz, tech committee, valuation guru, and owner of Columbia Valley Luxury Cars. Nathan, great to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Vu. I excited to be part of this tonight. It was fun to review our segment from just about a year ago and see what's happened and what's changed and kind of what's been the same. And apologize about my boring background. I'm in a hotel outside of Denver, Colorado, just driving back from PCA Treffin, so a lot of fun.
Yes, so as those of you that are watching, you might notice he might be a little glitchy at times. He is traveling back from the event, as he mentioned. We're doing the best that we can with the hotel connection. I think he's even tried the connection from his phone, so we'll try to manage that. But he'll be on with us all evening, because we're going to be talking about some cool stuff. So let's see if we can't throw up the agenda. We're going to be talking about where the Porsche market has gone from a year ago. I think in general terms, all Porsche enthusiasts that own a car can be happy that the market is still strong, but we're going to talk about the details of what about it, how long will it last, what's the potential in the next couple of months. Because Nathan also, with his business, has a lot of customers asking him to look out for cars and kind of feel the market for them. We're going to ask him what he's been hearing for the past year. And then one of my favorite things that we did last time is we have this speed round where we go over our favorite picks in different budget categories, the $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, and $100,000 price points. Now with this show, because we're talking about market, I thought we want to really make it interactive. Again, please put your questions in the live chat area, because I have my laptop here, I'll be scanning it. We also have PCA staff scanning, so we would love to hear your questions, and we'll ask Nathan to give his opinion on them. And anything I've missed, Nathan? Do we just want to go right at it?
Well, let's just jump right into it.
Okay. So a year ago, I would say we felt the market was pretty bonkers. And we made some predictions on some cars, and let's just review and see how correct we were, and then we can talk about the market since then. How's that?
Sounds good.
Let me see if I can't get our chart up there.
I saw it just a moment ago.
There it is. Okay, so in the $25,000 budget area, I chose the 914. You chose the 987.2 at around $25,000. I would say that for both of those cars, I mean, this is going to be, we're going to probably say this across all categories, but the 914 and 987.2, it's probably quite hard to find both of those cars at that price point today.
Yeah, unfortunately, 914 might be the easiest of them because they're old enough that there's a wider spread in quality. So you certainly can find a $25,000 914. However, it was last year you could find I would call it good to quite good driver for 25. You couldn't get an exceptional car even last year for that. And now 25 and a 914 has moved a little bit, and you're getting to the point of, yeah, it's driver, but it's going to have some needs. You're not getting a rock star car by any means. Whereas like my choice, the 97.2, which would be the second generation Boxsters and Cayman, or third generation Boxster, second generation Cayman, 9 to 12 cars. We could just squeak in last year at about 25. That same car now, the base model cars, even with some miles, are up anywhere from $8 to $12, $13, $14,000. So now that car is 35, 36, 37. And so I could no longer pick that for my $25,000.
That's right.
Yep.
When we go over to 50K, it's the same story for these two, I believe.
It really is. I mean, essentially, you can add about $25,000 on both those numbers. Maybe that's a little strong. You can get again, just as I described the 914, if you want to spend $50,000, you can get a 996 turbo, particularly if you're open to a Tiptronic or an open car, a cabriolet. You will not get a exceptional 6-speed coupe, but you might get maybe a higher mileage. We still have this thing where we kind of get panicky when the odometer has 6 digits in it. And so anything with over 100,000 miles, you might be able to squeak into that number, or potentially a car that's been modified. The market kind of punishes any significant modifications. They seem to tolerate things like wheels or coilovers or things like that. But you start getting into significant modifications, then the market punishes them a little bit. The 3.2 cars are probably one of the strongest performing segments of the market. I picked a 915 era car, which of course is the earlier style transmission through 86, because last year $50,000 would buy you a quite good driver. Again, not a collector quality car, but a car that a lot of people should probably own and could enjoy and take to something like a Treffin. And now, unfortunately, I think that number's pushed for that same car is probably in the neighborhood of $70,000 or $75,000. I still think it's a great car. I think that's a fair buy for that number. But it is a little bit of a hard pill to swallow if you were a person kind of thinking that you might wait this COVID situation out and pick up a car the following year. That same buy is going to cost you quite a bit more.
And I'm going to plug the video, the G-Body video that we did with you recently. That was, if you're looking to buy that era car, you've got to check out that video, because Nathan goes into a tremendous detail, the differences between the G-bodies and the options and the colors, the special variants. That was a very well done video, Nathan. So kudos to you for that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was fun for me to make. I'm pretty passionate, borderline obsessive about knowing about the cars and the differences and making sure people understand what it is that they're getting. So we did that video as a one take, which is quite challenging to do a 1 hour, one take video with no edits of any kind. But I just rambled on about 3.2 Carrera. So yeah, that was a ton of fun.
Very cool. So let me just jump into a quick question here, since we're talking about some of these cars that we listed last year. If we were to buy them now, like, we might have to consider that same car but with higher mileage. So we have a question from F. Pruitt 2. His car has 115,000 miles. Like, how much of a discount do you expect a 115,000 mile car versus a 50,000 mile car with everything else equal?
Does he say what model of car it is?
987.2.
Okay, so mileage matters somewhat in relation to the era of car. That's why I asked. So if you're fortunate enough to own a 356 or a 911, generally earlier than 73, unless in the rare circumstances where you can prove the mileage, you get a free pass. People buy the car and the quality of the car, and mileage is somewhat irrelevant. When you get into newer stuff, it matters. And a 987.2 is a car that's new enough people think about it in sort of a modern sense. So I think it's unfair. I think it's unfounded, but I can just speak to how the market behaves. And so a 9872 with 115,000 miles will get fairly punished in the market for that.
Mm.
With that said, we're in the best market we've ever been, and there's incredible demand for the 987.2. So you're going to have some people that are going to say, oh, I wish it didn't have 115,000 miles, but I can't find one, and I'm intrigued with the color combination or the quality or that it's club member owned, or a particular option configuration. So I wouldn't lose sleep over it. And the other segue I always tell people is, I'm proud of the owner who's driven at 115,000 miles, because at the end of the day, let's say you had a 50,000 mile car versus a 115. Well, the difference in price might be $10,000. I'm willing to bet that you got $10,000 worth of enjoyment out of 65,000 miles of driving. And if you didn't, you're probably in the wrong car.
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
I would have gotten that much fun out of it.
Well, let's take a look at our picks in the next segment here. I think we're up to, what, 75,000?
Yeah, I think we had a 356.
And 997 turbo.
For you?
Yep.
So 356 coupes, the probably the most moderate increases in the market have been on the earliest of cars. So you can still, again, you just pushed your envelope. It's tough to get a car I would get excited about at 75.
Yeah.
But it's doable. I mean, it might be more like 90, but they haven't had that tremendous value change that some of the other cars have had. In fact, quite as a contrary to that, if you look at the 997 turbos, that same car you could have bought for 75 last year now is 100 or 105.
Wow, that's amazing.
Those cars have been big movers. In fact, it was funny, about this same time I had a 07 997 turbo with just under 10,000 miles with all the right options, carbons and adaptive sport seats. And I had that car on the market, and it took me like 120 days to sell it in the 90s. And everyone said it was too high. Well, fast forward now, that car would do 125. So it's just about timing, right?
Yep. And then you and I chose the same car for 100K plus. I mean, and that still kind of stands true in terms of if I could get that car for that price now, I mean, I'd look like a genius.
Yes, I mean there was a moment, and it lasted about 19 seconds. But just about that day, Vu, that we filmed that show, you could find maybe one. Generally, it was a 14. There's some favor on the later 15 and 16 cars, and it generally might have had more miles, maybe 30,000 miles, and might not have had the right option configuration. That's kind of silliness, but people punish them if they don't have, for example, the carbon buckets. And so, but yeah, you could just tease into one at 100. And now, the less favorable configuration mileage or option configuration cars are now, say, 130, and the more desirable configuration low mileage cars are 150, 160. So they're up 30, 40, 50% in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
And
wow.
I think that's primarily driven by the 991.2 cars got insanely expensive. And you also can't get a 992 because of production. So there's just so much pressure on later model GT inventory.
Yeah. Now, I feel like we have to reiterate to those that are watching, we never want you to buy a Porsche because you're anticipating the value is going to go up. Although if you look at this portfolio that we've chosen, if we were a mutual fund, I would say that our picks have done very well over the past year. But that's not the reason to buy the car. And that's not the reason why we're doing this show. The reason why we're doing this show is we were identifying cars. Like if you had the opportunity at that point in time and you were looking for these cars, these were some good options for you to buy, enjoy, and feel fairly confident that you weren't going to lose value a significant amount. Nothing's a guarantee, but after a year, it's great to see that our picks have held strong. But let's go back and talk about the market since we made those calls. And I think earlier 2021 is sort of a certain discussion, and then as you got through halfway in the latter part of 2021 with like the shortage of cars and chips and all that kind of stuff, that's another kind of conversation. So take me through the first 6 months of 2021 and what did you see?
Yeah, I went back and rewatched our show just because I wanted to see, well, gosh, do I look like an idiot to anyone who watched our show? And not to toot our own horn, Vu, but I think most everything that we said on there really held up.
Hmm.
And so I pulled a couple quotes out there that I think still hold up and sort of reflect that market at that time. And I said, people were uncertain about their jobs, they were uncertain about the economy, and the average person would assume that prices might be depressed or coming down. And I said, well, nothing could be further from the truth. And actually, what I said is, I said, every segment of the market is good right now.
Hmm.
And so the quote was, as of 11/18/2020, the market is hot. And so really what you're seeing today is the market just got hotter and hotter. It never cooled from there. Whereas if you look back, for example, at the beginning of COVID, if you were kind of a seer, you would have bought a car in April or May of 2020. I
Hmm.
mean, that was the absolute low point because there was just this sense of panic. And really by last November, people realized, hey, we're going to get through this. And people had a renewed sense of optimism. The economy was rebounding. But we also didn't have this chip shortage situation going on.
Hmm. Hmm.
So for those, if you've been living under a rock and aren't aware of this right now, if you walk into a new Porsche dealer anywhere in the world, you will find almost zero inventory on any lots.
That's crazy. I don't think.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever been to a dealership or a Porsche dealership specifically where there's like one car, or some dealerships are asking their customers to borrow their cars just so that they have something in their showroom. Like, God, this is strange.
Yeah, and it's universal across every dealer. Driving across America this week, I drive by all these little small town dealers. In fact, funny story, in Kohler, Wisconsin, where Treffen was held, my wife and I went for a walk, and they had a new Bronco
Hmm.
sitting at their little small town Porsche store. And my wife says to me, "Oh my God, I want that." I said, "Honey, trust me, that's not available." She says, "Well, go in. Maybe it's a small town and no one knows they have it." I said, "Well, that's not true." So of course we went in, and the sales guy was very nice, and he just laughed and he said, "No, that's our demo. We're not allowed to sell." He says, "I could have sold that 100 times over."
Right.
And so that's true whether we're talking Ford, Honda, Toyota,
Yeah.
or Porsche. And so if you can't get a new car, well, there's two things that happen. The kind of person that needs a new car now has to buy a used car. And how are used cars created? Real simple. They're created when someone gets a new car.
Hmm.
I mean, that's how it happens. And so if no one's getting new cars, used cars aren't coming to market. And people that, for whatever reason, whether their car was totaled or lost or they need to add a vehicle, they're forced to go used for the most part.
Yeah, and I know a lot of dealers are trying to be creative and reaching out to their existing customers and buying their current Porsche and luring them in, so to speak, to maybe order one and be Porsche-less for a couple of months until this chip shortage gets sorted out and they have a new car. So again, it's just really interesting to see this because we've never gone through anything like this before, or at least I haven't in my lifetime.
No, I mean in America too, there's such a different culture around new cars. In America, we're used to this new car superstore model where you walk on the lot and they've got 400 new cars sitting there. Believe it or not, if you go to Europe, that's not how the model works. I mean, you would go to the Porsche dealer and you might have some cars to try out, but then most people would order a car. And maybe that'll be the new world order. I don't know. But we're so used to the idea that we go on a Saturday and by 4 o'clock we're driving off in a new car with our free hot dogs and the balloons for the kids.
Yeah. Well, so let me jump to some of our members' questions here. Cy
Sure.
Craft was sent in a question about 996 values, and as you said, kind of all cars have come up. The 996 sort of at one point of its life had a little bit of a bad rap, but with the market and with the realization that 996s are fantastic cars. What are your thoughts on will the values of these cars continue to rise or will they level off? It's hard to say because I know we don't have exactly a crystal ball, but let's try to make a prediction.
Yeah. My prediction is the 996, like many generations that preceded it, had a moment in time where it was out of favor. And we won't rehash all those reasons because I don't necessarily think they're valid, but,
Hmm.
that's how the market behaved. And really about 2 years ago, the market started to look at the 996 with a new set of eyes. I think it crested 20 years. and I think its design is aging well. I also think if someone wants a 911, even though the 996s are doing well, there still is no cheaper generation of 911 that you can buy. And it's an eminently good car. I own a 996. I think they're a fabulous car. I think there's a whole generation of people that grew up, that was the 911 of their youth. I think that helps. And even though there's a litany of known potential foibles with a 996, we have to remember that there's a known list of foibles on every generation of Porsche. I mean, I always jokingly tell people, I love Porsche, but we're not Honda. We're not Toyota. We don't build cars that almost never break. So some of the charm of ownership with Porsche is that you kind of learn, hey, what are the known foibles? How do I inspect for them? How do I know about them? How do I remedy them? And so the good news is with the 996 product and corollary, the 986, we know what the issues are. We know how to solve them and how to work around them. And I think the market's getting pretty comfortable with that. So I think a 996, I would never label cars investments, but I think if you buy a good, honest, well-documented 996 of almost any configuration, it will do just fine. The coupes right now are doing the best, and I think that will stay true. However, the cabriolets are the better value. You know, if you want to be sub $25,000, you're likely going to be a cabriolet. So,
and
yeah,
to my friends that are watching, they're going to say cheers when I say this, but I love my 996 with the Aero kit, and I think it's such a special car. It's visually stunning. It drives well. You know, it performs well, and so it's nice. I've always loved the car. You know, I bought that car in 2005, and it's always been a fantastic car, and I've been a pro 996 person forever. It's just nice to finally see it kind to get that spotlight and get the respect that it deserves.
Well, really, Vu, maybe you're just the trendsetter because you actually have the model 996 that probably is in the highest demand if we exclude the turbo, which is the 99 Aero kit with some of the performance goodies. So right now the market, if you had a 99 Aero kit limited slip factory MO30 in a desirable color combination, people would be floored to see what that car will do. We're going to see regular early 996s well over $50,000 if they're configured that way. So you're ahead of the curve, Vu.
Thank you, sir. Can I share with you an observation, because it's been fairly quiet on this particular model, and maybe it's just the people that I hang around that don't bring it up for whatever reason, but it seems to me there's been a lot of chatter on G-body cars, you know, short hood, you know, 80s eras G-body cars. You know, there was a white one online that went, I think it was an 88 or something like that, 88 coupe that went for like $90,000. It was all the talk. I haven't heard much about long hood cars. Have they leveled off, or are there just not cars being sold and people don't talk about them? Am I missing something? Am I just not in that world?
I think, you know, people always say, are there any good buys in the market right now? And I don't want to spoil some of the things for later in the show, but I would label the 69 to 73 what we oftentimes call the long hood cars. I would call these cars a buy in the market. I think really what happened is in the earlier run-up, they got so expensive that they priced a lot of potential buyers out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we always forget this. You know, I live in Seattle, Washington, where, you know, it seems like $100 bills are hanging on every tree. But the average enthusiast, let's be honest, $100,000 is a huge barrier of entry. You know, they're much more comfortable spending $20,000 or $25,000. And so as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, to even get anything, a palatable running, driving long hood, it was 6 figures. But you could still get an 911 SC or an early 3.2 for, say, 25. Well, that made a lot of sense to people to convert over there. And I always made the argument that didn't make a lot of sense because a 73 isn't 4 times as good as an SC. It just isn't. And I love early cars. Like if I could only have one car in my collection, it would be a 70 or 71. So that tells you
how much you love,
right?
Yeah.
I love early cars, but they aren't 4 times as good as a G-body car. And so I think that's the market realization coming. So the long hood cars, I think, have cooled slightly. You can actually probably get not a rock star, but a palatably decent driver T, you know, like maybe the less desirable years, like a 69 T coupe, not in maybe the most interesting of colors, but for $75,000 you could get one.
Yeah.
That wasn't really true 5 years ago. Whereas now, again, if you're trying to spend $75,000 on a G-body car, you can get one, but the quality is significantly lower than it would have been a couple of years back.
I would say also, in similar vein, the discussion of 993s have been a little bit softer, and 964s have been a little bit louder.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, of course, 993s were always worth 2x what 964s were, right? Which was funny because having worked at a Porsche dealer when 964s were new, they kind of stole my heart. I always had an affinity for 964s, even though I've owned a 993 for over 20 years. I always just had this affinity for 964s, and they were this incredible buy. Well, almost overnight, they became the car to own. I mean, if you had a 964, that was the car that drew a crowd at an event. And the 993 was always popular. It was just kind of assumed, right? It was just always that kid that everybody liked. Right. But it just sort of fell out of the bright light. You know, it was kind of the side of the stage. It never fell off the stage. It just sort of lost its moment. I think really what happened is that as everyone transitioned to 964s, you simply could not find a 964. So I still get the call now that people say, look, I want a 964 or a 993. I prefer slightly a 964, but I'll take a 993, which is opposite of what happened 5 years ago.
Wow.
Right? People 5 years ago said, I really want a 993, but I can only afford a 964, so I'll take a 964. But interestingly, in this, the 993 is the one car since our last show that's had the biggest change. Particularly the wide body cars right now that are, I don't even know what the right word for it is. I can wrap my head around it, right? Where people paying $150,000, $60,000, $70,000 for, and again, not these cars in any way, but fairly maybe driver plus quality cars with mid mileage, 30 to 70,000 miles. You know, a car that as recently as last November maybe done 100 or maybe 105.
Yeah. So I apologize, folks, again, for those of you that are just joining us. Nathan is in a hotel trying to work his best with the Wi-Fi that he has. I'd like to go to a question, and this one, really piqued my interest when it happened. A question from DJ Mixmo, talking about the 928 from Risky Business going for 1.98 million, and we love 928s, but 1.98 million. What in the world? I mean, maybe that's just like
that's
two people that battled it out. I don't know.
That's a deal that absolutely lit up the internet. To your point, and I think whenever we have a sale like that, the thing I always invoke is the fact that there's always an outlier. So I'm going to invoke the outlier rule because that I'm very much a 928 fan. I own an early 928, a 79, very similar to the Risky Business car. I think it's arguably mine's in a better color. It's called Hellblau, also a 5-speed car, just like that car. Do I think that my car is now worth $1.9 million? No, on no planet, not ever.
But it's a Nathan Merz. It's a Nathan Merz 928.
Oh yeah, I love the car. I mean, it's every time I walk past it in my garage, I have just a little, giggle of glee with this silly car. And so I thought that sale was very interesting, and I could have seen a rational situation where, the car would have got, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 for sort of the novelty of being in that movie. Now, mind you, they used something like 5 different 928s in the filming of that show. Although, however, this is the one that was used in all the various driving scenes, and so it's the most important one. I think really what that is that's a situation where that movie is a cultural touchstone for a generation of people.
Absolutely.
And someone had the money. I think it's more reflective of the overall economy. Someone had the money, and they said, "I want it."
Yep.
I can't say the term because it's not appropriate on the show, but if you've ever watched the movie, one of the characters basically tells Tom Cruise, blank blank, do it. Maybe that's what someone decided to do when they bid on the car.
All right, well, that's a good pause right there. We're going to throw up the winners of the raffle, the book, as well as the utility pad here. So congratulations to Alex for the book. Make sure you send us a note. We'll get this sent out to you. And Jeff from Metro New York, congratulations on the utility pad. We will also mail this out to you. Just send a note to Damon or Manny, who's watching the live chat. So, what were your customers looking for? Was there a common theme through the year, or anything interesting that customers were requesting from you?
Well, maybe it'll be interesting for people on this show to hear what my customers were asking for. It became not interesting for me because they only asked for the same 5 things. And so there's days I just dreaded picking up my phone or answering my email because everybody said, oh, you know what I'd really like? And I just go, oh no. And it usually went something like this. Well, I want an 87 to 89 3.2 curve, but it has to be a coupe, and it just can't be white, red, black, or silver. And by the way, it has to have under 100,000 miles, and I've got a $50,000 budget, maybe 60.
Oh my goodness.
And I always just hated that email because I wanted to say, well, join the list with the 250 other people who've reached out over the last 90 days that want that exact same car. And it breaks my heart because actually I wish I could fill that because that would be a great car. It's just that's the car everybody wants right now. And so, what I've suggested to people is I said, well, either you have to pivot your budget or you have to pivot your wants, right? And so I said, okay, let's look at 915 cars. Let's look at open cars. I highly suggest SCs in mid-years to try to open that up. Unfortunately, now $50,000 doesn't buy a good example of any of those cars. But so I would say the 3.2 G50 was probably my number 1 inquiry. Probably number 2 was a 964 manual coupe. And of course, everyone says, well, I only want a C2, and it's got to be a later car with head gaskets, so I want a 92 to 94. Oh, and by the way, I want ruby stone or mint green. Again, another one where I just struggle because I said, well, okay, you and everybody else. And so that's a really tough order to fill. And then the next call came for a 993 wide body, right? And of course, everyone wanted a 2S. There's always the debate, is a 2S or a 4S more valuable? I won't weigh in on that except to say that the majority of the callers or inquirers tend to ask for a 2S and will say, oh, I'm open to a 4S. Right?
Yeah, I believe that.
So a lot of interest in those cars. And then on the water-cooled side, what everyone wants is they want a second generation 997 or 987. I'm actually a little bit mad at myself. I made that video comparing the 987 Spider to the 981 Spider, and my phone lit up after that, and everyone says, oh my God, you got to get me a 987 Spider. And there's so much fear around IMS failure that everyone wants a .2 car, such that I actually stopped recommending them because as great of a car as they are, the premium you pay for them, I would argue you might as well just go to, say, a 981 or a 991. And then, of course, the other thing people wanted was 991.2 GT3 Touring.
Touring, interesting.
Touring, yes. Not a lot of interest in winged cars or any cars with PDKs, or even GT3 RSs. I mean, they've done okay in the market, but I don't get a lot of inquiries. But GT3 Tourings, in fact, it was funny. I sold 4 GT3 Tourings right at the beginning of COVID, and people listening to this are going to die when they hear this, but I sold one of them at MSRP and the other 3 anywhere between 5 and 15 under MSRP.
Under
and
MSRP.
Those cars now all under MSRP.
Under.
And I had them publicly listed. I mean, it wasn't like a secret backdoor handshake deal, and it wasn't like they sold in 24 hours. They took anywhere from a week to 8 weeks to sell. So, go figure that one. those cars now are 50 to 100 over.
So speaking of modern cars and manual versus PDK, I think we often hear dealers see a take rate of, one manual car out of 10, 10 cars sold. In your world, is that the same, or are more people looking for manual cars?
Well, there's two ways you got to answer this question. The take rate when they're new obviously represents what the demand was for new cars, right? So if the take rate for it is 90% PDK, I mean, you can argue some of that's driven by the fact dealers preferentially order more PDKs. But ultimately, if someone's going to plunk down on, say, $150,000 for a new 911, they wanted that car. They didn't buy it because it just fell in their lap, right? So what I always tell people is, as PCA members or enthusiasts on the various forums, we think we represent the whole market, but the reality is that the true enthusiast buyer maybe represents 10 or 15% of the buyer pool. The rest of the people that buy these cars are just people that are in the fortunate
position to be able to
category.
In the position to be able to buy the car.
Right.
Right.
And so, my customers are enthusiasts, so they call for manual. But I'm not naive to think that there aren't buyers for PDKs. And the other caveat I always tell people, the PDK is a fabulous transmission. So this is not a statement about my view of the transmission. It's just a statement of what the market values it at. Does that make sense?
Yep. Now, I think we also talked about colors, and there was Rich Tillotson here wrote, how much did color affect value over the past year?
Color's been a story with Porsche for probably, a keynote story for probably at least 5 years. But it's really only gotten stronger and stronger over time. And so, we see situations now where color sometimes trumps all other factors.
Really?
So if you think of when you value a car, you think about the following factors, which are mileage, quality, history, documentation, color, option, configuration, right? All those things are kind of a matrix of how you form what a car is worth. And it used to be color, maybe was somewhere in the top 3 or 4. On certain models, I would argue color is 1 or 2.
Color is everything for some people.
Oh, absolutely. So I've had customers that'll buy a car that needs a complete restoration, paying the money they could have bought a really good drivable car simply because it started life as, say, Mexico Blue or mint green. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I mean, I personally, you come to my garage, I know before the show, Vu and I almost came to blows, and I almost didn't get on the show because you insulted one of my cars. Vu, so,
I didn't insult.
Because
I didn't insult.
You did, Vu.
I didn't insult. I said I didn't love your Cayman. I did appreciate it. I just didn't love it. There's a difference. That was not insulting. And why don't you tell them a little bit about the car?
Yeah, well, the car is in a color called Lindgrün, or sometimes called Chartreuse. It's an early 911 color. I put, not so politely, people have referred to it as baby poop or vomit. So I personally love the color, but I do recognize not everyone else does. So
for those of you, your October panorama should be coming to your mailboxes here soon. If not, you can also check out the October pano online. But there's a parade coverage in that issue, and this very unique Cayman that Nathan brought. There are photos of it. Now, it's not that car, because that car is, what green is that?
That's called Peridot, which is also a great color.
Yeah.
And that was a color on the Cayman R.
And the way I would describe your car is that's Peridot green, which is a very unique green, and your green is a little bit pukier.
Yes.
But I say that with the most love. I say that all with love. All right, any other big points you want to come across with a customer asks in the last year?
I think it's the other thing that we're seeing in the market is, and again, this saddens me because people think I get excited when values go up. I actually don't. My passion is putting people in cars that they love, and cars they can drive and enjoy. And so, the term that hipsters use, they use the term FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot more of that, sort of akin maybe to how real estate agents would feel as the housing market's so hard to find something. And so now customers are calling and they say, well, I'm not even going to tell you my dream car. If it has a Porsche crest on the hood, I don't even care. If it fits my budget, I'll buy it. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
And so I would say people are compromising in ways that I actually suggest that they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And because when they compromise on quality, I'm more okay if they compromise on model, because a good example of almost any Porsche is a great car. But a bad example of even the best model is a terrible car. And
Yeah.
it breaks my heart when someone buys a car and they have a bad experience and they say, oh, well, those cars aren't what they're cracked up to be.
Yeah.
I had one. And I said, well, that's not a fair comparison, because you bought a car that was poorly maintained or had undisclosed accident damage, or let's just say it didn't drive the same way it did when it left Stuttgart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sad.
Yeah, yeah. So before we go to speed round and leave this topic, there was a question here, and I'm trying to pull it up. I remember the question. I'm sorry if I'm not going to call your name out for it, but you know, as inventory is getting tight and not as many cars available, you, Nathan, are a professional car hunter in my mind. So folks are asking, like, where are you finding these cars? Are you finding them, you know, on Facebook Marketplace, eBay, online auctions? Of course, you got to go to the Mart. And you can probably talk about your most recent Mart acquisition that you took to Treffin. But any tips for people that want to someday be as good as a car hunter as you?
Well, I mean, I think those are great questions. So what I always, you know, if you know a little bit about what I do, I almost never buy a car that's been publicly listed for sale. And that's, I'm very thankful that. I feel very blessed, so I don't say that in any kind of bragging sort of way. I've just been in this business long enough that I've built relationships with people in the Porsche community, and it seems as though they've come to trust and appreciate what I do. And so luckily I get offered the bulk of the cars that I eventually, you know, resell or deal with have been offered to me off the market. Mm-hmm. And so that's the same advice that I give people looking is, if you're going to look in all the standard places, be that various online auction formats, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, Auto Trader, wherever you might be looking, the problem is the market's so good and there's so much of that, what we talked about earlier, the FOMO, that people are making buying decisions without using any, you know, the right tools, taking the time to really inspect the cars and find out about the cars. And that's when bad decisions are made.
Yeah,
and
they're
so
willing to overlook little things when normally they wouldn't have.
Yeah, so I tell people, build relationships long term in the Porsche community, right? So if there's someone in your local club that has a car you've always admired, build a genuine relationship with the owner. Not just a relationship of, I hope to get something from you, but provide them some value or information or help them in some way, and just let them know, hey, I've always wanted a, you know, Boxster Spider. If you're ever interested in selling it, I would be interested, and I would take a great care of it, right? I mean, you build a relationship with your local shops. Those are good sources, because oftentimes when someone wants to sell a car, they bring it into their trusted shop and they ask the technician there, well, you know, what's my car worth, or, you know, what should I fix before I list the car? That's a great place to get a car. The PCA Mart is still a really good place. As you mentioned, I bought a 986 on the PCA Mart just 2 weeks ago because I wanted to go on.
Can I tell the
Treffin.
beginning of that story? Can I tell the beginning of that
Sure.
story?
Yeah,
So the car that he recently bought to take to Treffin, a few days before he bought it, that PCA member actually just walked through the door here at PCA headquarters, and he said, "Hey, you know, I'm kind of getting out of the sports car, and I have this Boxster," and he said a few details, and of course we automatically said, well, as a PCA member, you have an opportunity to list your car in the Mart for free. And he said, well, I'm not so sure how I know how to do that. And our staff, I believe, helped him through all of that. And within a couple of I think maybe 24 hours even, you found it.
Well, yeah, it was actually funny. So the funny story, Vu, was I was preparing my 928, my 78 928, my risky business car, if you will, to take the trip. And it just gave me a few little hiccups right before I was set to leave, such that I felt maybe 5,000 miles in this 40-year-old car wasn't the best choice, especially since my wife was coming along. And so I started thinking about, well, what would I do? And I thought, well, maybe if I buy a car on the East Coast, then I only have to drive one direction versus driving all the way back east and then coming back home to Seattle. So I jumped on the PCA Mart. It was almost like the stars aligned, or if you're a God-believing man, you feel like God dropped this car on the Mart or something. I don't know, but it was the first car on there, and I clicked on it, and it was a very innocuous-looking base 2003 Boxster, which normally I would have probably clicked past. But it caught my attention because it said IMS failure, and the motor was replaced with a 3.6 liter. And I said, well, now we're talking.
And it was really well priced.
It was well priced. And so anyway, I looked at that and I clicked on it, and he lived in Maryland. And I looked at the address, and he was about 5 miles from the PCA headquarters. And I thought, you know what? So I reached out to him and I said, hey, if I bought this car, would you be willing to drop it off at PCA? And he said, sure, I was just there. So he dropped it off. I paid him for it, and then I flew out. I'd shipped some service stuff. You were so gracious as to let me use the PCA garage. So I think it was just last
we
Monday.
thought this would make a great video series to have his car that he had never seen. And actually, you kind of, I wouldn't say you cut corners, but you didn't do I don't believe you did a full PPI on the car, but you did check on who did the engine swap, and you talked to everyone. So you did most of your due diligence, but because of the timing of Treffin and not wanting to lose his car, you didn't do a PPI, correct?
I didn't, which I always tell people, don't buy a car sight unseen, but I figured, as honest as I can be, look, the car was on PCA Mart for $19,500, and I said, well, for $19,500, if it blows up, like I can assume that risk. And if nothing else, I'm going to drive it 5,000 miles. I'm going to have some fun with it, and it's got to be worth at least that when I get home with it. And so
I'm going to stop you there because I want to tease folks, because we're going to finish that story in another segment. But we'll just say a video is going to come about the pre-trip, not pre-purchase, but pre-trip inspection that we did with that car. And he drove it to Treffin, and now he's in Colorado. So obviously the car, knock on wood, is doing well. It's quite the hot rod. We'll learn more about that car. But I wanted to jump over to the speed round because we're at 45-minute mark. And so Robert, if you don't mind, we talked about the $25,000 pick from 2020, the 914, and Nathan's 987.2. Now, I do not know what Nathan picked, and he doesn't know what I picked, and we will both see what we picked for the first time. For the $25,000 range, I chose the Boxster 550 Spider. I think that is a gorgeous car. Now, I do realize I am probably on the very edge of that price point, but I think if you dig, you probably could find that car.
It's too funny you picked that car, Vu, because I think I actually have one of those cars in my garage.
It's a beautiful car.
I love it.
Yes.
Oh, I love that car. In fact, I'm a little worried now that I've spent 5,000 miles driving my 3.6 liter Boxster, whether I'll be underwhelmed with my 3.2 liter Boxster when I get home. I don't know, but it's a spectacular car. I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I think you already know it. A pretty good, not a perfect one, but a pretty good one sold, I think, just today or maybe yesterday on BAT, and it did $37,800 with the fee.
Fine.
Another car just
Fine. So
but
all my picks, I'm just going to add mileage. I'm going to add mileage to the car until it drops down to 25. It's possible you can find that car in not Nathan Merz condition. I'm talking about 20-footer, maybe a little bit of miles.
Yeah,
but
they are a great car.
Yeah. So you picked a Boxster, but I didn't see you. Did you pick a particular Boxster?
I picked an 03 or an 04 Boxster S.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very much the same car, just trimmed a little bit different. And you absolutely can buy that car for 25 because, in fact, when I stop vacationing so darn much, I'm going to list an '04 Boxster S for sale
Oh,
at
is that the speed
$25,000.
yellow
That's a
one?
really good car. Speed yellow.
Oh, I
Uh,
saw that car. That's a beautiful car.
it's a beautiful car. In fact, that's the thing I hate about what I do is that I fall in love with my inventory and I think this is way too much car for 25 grand. So frankly, if someone's going to buy that car for me, they got to pass my test. I got to like them because I'm like,
But
man,
I
it's a great
am,
car.
I do realize that you're able to let things go, and that more power to you because I just don't have that in me. I just want to keep everything. And that speed
Yeah.
yellow car you're talking about is gorgeous. My dad has a speed yellow Boxster that he absolutely adores. It's super clean. And what's interesting is when it's in a special color, like in people's mind, just the general public, they find that car or believe that car is a much higher value than it really is. Like that same car in silver or black just doesn't come across as an expensive car. You find it in speed yellow, people think it's a $100,000 car automatically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So let's go to our $50,000 pick. Last time we talked about nine. Oh, is this our? Oh, this is no. You pulled up the one that I did pick. So I picked. Again, I'm gonna throw the mileage and patina clause in there, but chasing after a 964 at the 50K range. I think you can find one that's running. I think you can find one that has patina and a little bit higher mileage that you're willing to get your elbows a little greasy with. So that's mine, and it looked like you picked a 928, a nice transaxle.
Yeah, so I'm gonna chuckle, Vu, but I will say, people say you can't buy a 964 coupe right now for $50,000, and I will push back a little bit because I think you can if you deploy some of the things I talked about, which is relationship. If you
Hmm.
think you're going to go buy one of those on one of the common auction platforms right now,
Forget
it is
about it.
not going to
Forget
happen.
about it.
But I do meet people on a regular basis in the club that have bought those cars in that price range. And yeah, they might need a little bit of TLC, but they are out there. But they
The
are
dream
very hard to get.
The dream is you find the current owner of a 964, or it's in their family, and it's another car, and it's got higher mileage to them. It's just an older car that leaks on the driveway, and that you come in and you scoop and go away with it. Like that's the hope. Like I think there's still stuff like
Yeah.
that out there.
Well, and I think that within the club, there are still a body of people that it's not about every last dollar. It's about finding the right custodian for their car.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe it's not even that they're naive. I mean, sometimes they'll say, yeah, I think I could get more money for it, but it's not the dollar.
Yeah.
It's the fact that I really appreciate that person's
Yeah.
enthusiasm or knowledge or passion. So
And
my pick.
I'll plug our
Oh, go
Project
ahead.
964. That gentleman
Yeah.
could have totally sold the 964, although it wasn't running and it had issues, but he felt like he loved the club and he would rather donate the car to us or sell it to us for $1 or whatever it was, so that we can use that car for content and it would be forever loved, right? So
Yeah,
those are the
absolutely.
instances. Yep.
So my pick was a 928. I think 928s are having their moment in the sun. We'll ignore the whole risky business thing, but I think for $50,000, a lot of people will say to me, "Oh, gosh, you could have picked that for $25,000." And you're right, you can still get a 928 quite easily for 25. But if there's any Porsche that you probably don't want to cheap out on the initial purchase, it's a 928. They're complex machines, and many of them have been driven very few miles lately. So spend a little more upfront to get a car that's of very good quality. And that's one of the cars I'm going to go outside my comfort zone and say I would prefer a 928 that is a little bit higher mileage, particularly if the mileage has come recent. So like if I find a 928 that's covered 20 or 30,000 miles in the last 3 or 4 years, that's a car I'm going to get excited about because when a 928 is really well sorted, they stay sorted and they're an exceptional driving car. They don't sit well. So, you buy the really low mileage one, you're going to find some challenges, as I found with my 79, right? It had been sitting primarily for the last 25 years, and I've been working like a dog trying to get that car. So that's my suggestion on a 928. Spend the money up front.
Yep. So let's go to our 75K, and I also have a clause with my pick on this one too. A GT4. Wait, but let me explain my clause. Let me explain my clause. My clause is this is a car that's been on track, high mileage, but well kept, and has let's say track track marks and it's been a track car for someone. I think that's out there. I want to believe that that's out there.
I think that your 2016 GT4, I think it's out there. I'll describe so people watching this know what it looks like. It's been painted with a brush in Barbie doll pink, and it has Hello Kitty stickers. It's got a salvage title and 130,000 miles, but it's a gem. So there you go, Lou.
Why you gotta hate on Hello Kitty? Why do you have to hate on Hello Kitty? I would take it if I could get a 2016 GT4 and it had Hello Kitty stickers on it for that price. I would take it. So that was a little bit of a dream. I'll admit that one was a stretch. Now, what was your pick for 75K?
And mine's getting to be a stretch, but it is palatable. It's a 987.2 Cayman R, 2012 only. Less than 500 of these came to the U.S. Probably for 75. It's likely going to have a PDK, which I think is just fine. The market will preferentially pay a little more for a 6-speed, and it might have a few more miles. But what a car!
Yeah,
I mean, it's just one of those cars that if you look on paper, it doesn't look that exceptional. But it's one of those cars where every engineer that worked for Porsche on that day they signed off on that project was on their A game. It is just, it's a great car.
Now, are the R's hard to find? What's their production and inventory situation?
They're incredibly hard to find. 2012 only. I don't want to say the wrong number because someone will quote me wrong. I'm usually pretty good, but it's less than 500 units. There's about half as many as they sold, because basically they're a platform share with a 987.2 Boxster Spider.
Right.
But they're twice as rare, or half as many were made. And so for a long time, they just were sort of hidden. A lot of people didn't really pay attention to them. But yeah, if you could, the holy grail, of course, is one in Peridot with a 6-speed and the carbon buckets. But there isn't really a bad configuration for these cars. For a touring car, I much prefer the standard sport seats, even though people will derogatorily call them sofa seats. If I was going to take this 5,000-mile trip, I'd take the quote sofas.
I don't know were there ever any paint to sample Cayman R's? Like I've seen Peridot, I've seen white, but I don't know that I've seen any kind of jelly bean colors in the Cayman R.
There are some paint to sample, but not a whole lot because, again, remember in 2012, the economy wasn't great. These cars weren't flying off the lot. In fact, it was so funny. The last Cayman R that I sold was a 12, and its in-service date was December of 13, which means it sat on the dealer's lot for almost 2 years, unsold. So it's hard to believe that now, but again, the new 981 was out, and the economy wasn't super great, and they were fairly expensive for a mid-engine car. That one in particular had a pretty high MSRP, and it sat around.
All right, let's go to 100K. And I probably have a ton of clauses. 718 Spider with super high mileage for considering what age that car is.
Yeah, so like in 1 year they drove it to the moon and back. I like it, dude.
I just love the Spider. Look, I'll take an earlier generation Spider as well. I just love the Spider platform. I feel as though the Boxster just the look of it, and it's probably the only convertible that I truly love with the top up. Probably more than I do with the top down. It's just a gorgeous car from front to rear, and I love how there's no filters between your head and the exhaust coming, the sounds that are coming out of the exhaust, and it's just a fun ride. So well balanced. The shifter is awesome. 100K plus a little something. That's my pick.
Yeah, no. In fairness, if someone was smart enough and lucky enough to have ordered one and they didn't go crazy on options, you could have got one new for basically that, just a little bit more. So I shouldn't actually make fun of you. So right now, because of shortages, they're bringing well over MSRP. But if someone had locked in an order, at MSRP and was pretty judicious with their option choices, that
was reasonable, right? That was a realistic choice.
Yeah, I have a client. He's probably watching this show now, and he called me, and he bought one that has not a single option on it. It's white, and the option list has nothing on it.
And honestly, I would love that. I would love a car with 0 options, just pure, just driving fun.
Don't like it.
Yeah. All right, what did you pick?
I picked a
Oh,
6973.
so your
Hot
long hood roots creep up at the
Oh,
100K
well,
range.
because again, they've softened a little bit. And the thing about hot rods is that it's all about the execution.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are absolutely atrocious, but when they're done well, and when I say well, I don't just mean the aesthetics. I would encourage anyone who's going to buy a hot rod 911, go drive it and drive a bunch of them because if you think old Porsches aren't all created equal, it's even more extreme when you get into the hot rod cars. And so sometimes the builder or whoever assembled the car, the car doesn't come together. But every so often you'll get it in one and it's like it was built with the hand of God. I mean,
Mm.
it's magic. And I enjoy no Porsche of mine more than my early 911 hot rods. But I've also driven a lot of them that very sadly, they sure look the part and they look super cool, but they're just disjointed
They
or
didn't measure up?
they didn't measure up. But the
Yeah.
cool thing is if you hunt around there out there, I would suggest not probably buying one off the online auction platforms, not because those aren't good venues, but you don't get the opportunity to go drive the car
Mm-hmm.
except for in rare circumstance, and that's really critical with these. Go drive a bunch, and the one
Right.
that speaks to you is the one you should buy.
Cool. Well, we are at the top of the hour. There's a couple things I'd like to share with everyone. The next show, the next Tech Tactics Live, we're actually going to be in Las Vegas, and we're going to be together with Tony at the 900 Series Garage. And what we're going to be doing there is we're also going to be visiting SEMA, and we're going to bring back what we saw at SEMA back to Tony's garage and share it with you live and maybe learn a little bit about Tony and the whole series. So it should be a great show. And of course, we'll send reminders. If you click subscribe, the system will automatically remind you. And then after that, we're going to stay in sort of the LA area. We're going to go out to Huntington Beach, California at Gunther Works headquarters, where we'll, for the first time, I've talked about it before, we're having an event called Umstock with umlaut, the U with the two dots, and it's going to be a show. The display cars are already sold out, or number of slots for the display cars are already sold out. We're having 100 PCA members modified Porsches. First time that we've really put a spotlight on these types of cars. Now, attending the event is open to anyone. You don't have to register, just show up. It's 11 to 2, and if you're looking for more information, just go to pca.org. And with that, everyone, again, thank you to Pirelli. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you had a great time. Thank you, Nathan, as always. We'll see you again somewhere around PCA land here shortly. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Vu.